Today we're pleased to host Michael Burkett on our episode considering the metaphor of the body as machine. 20 years ago, the writer Mark Graef, in a provocative essay called Against Exercise, noted that, quote, modern exercise makes you acknowledge the machine operating inside of yourself. His essay is no PN to this notion. It's a dismantling of it. After systematically criticizing our mechanistic worldview, Graef asks, how do we acquire the courage to exist as a set of numbers? And just last week, Jocko Willink, fitness enthusiast and influencer, posted to Instagram at 4:32 a.m., engine check light on, taking it back down for maintenance. This idea seems to have won, the idea of the body as machine. It's emblematic and representative of our times. Michael, please introduce yourself and feel free to tell us a bit about your career, your martial arts background, your intellectual fascination with the body, and all of your experience that you bring to bear on this question.
All right, I'm Michael Burkett from Columbia, South Carolina. I am a massage therapist here in Columbia. In the late 1990s, I started doing martial arts after growing up playing soccer. When I was the day before my 15th birthday, I fractured a vertebra in my spine, which led me to lay in bed for an entire summer. So shortly thereafter, when I got into judo, we did a process of kind of rebuilding my body. So my sensei had me at the lowest level you could be in jiu-jitsu for about 2 years, where most people stay for about 3 or 4 months as I rebuilt my body a little bit. From there, during that process, as a quick way to learn anatomy, I went to massage therapy school to learn gross anatomy to make my judo practice better. And from there, I got my first ever massage therapy client, which happened to be a gentleman named Richard Soren, who owns a company named Sorenex Exercise Equipment. He recently passed, sadly, but Sorenex has their finger on every strength and power athlete in the country. So they build weight rooms for universities, for professional football teams. So for instance, at football, where I currently run the massage therapy program at USC football, the weight room, the $1 million weight room is built by Sorenex, right? And so I think all SEC schools have a Sorenex weight room. So I'm giving this as an example to say, I was thrust into the deep end of understanding human physiology and exercise science very quickly because it was a survival mechanism. So my background in judo really led me to being able to work with athletes in a very specific way when they were injured because I knew what it was like to be injured.
So when you hear that quotation I read from Graef about how do we find the courage to exist as a set of numbers, how do you respond to it?
I've had the experience of trying to exist as a set of numbers in my years of thinking about being a human, basically. I mean, at some point I had an Oura ring and a Whoop band and all the things that are promised to us in modernity that will tell us everything we need to know about how to exist in the world as a set of numbers. I found it barely useful statistically over a number of years. I think I wore an Oura ring for 3 years. And basically the one thing I learned is my body really likes to sleep from 11:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. So like that was just like a good thing to know in some way. It was just like, oh man, okay. So at about 11, I start winding it down. It's like if you get an average of 3 years of knowing that, that's a pretty good piece of information. So I know if at 12:30, I'm going to be a little tired, we got to get to bed. But other than that, I really found it kind of anxiety inducing. And what I really found, and I'm no philosopher, but I really found that it's the wrong level of trying to approach a human being as a mechanistic target, to be honest with you. And I think what we're going to discuss is that everybody wants the human body to be a machine, right? That's what they think. Like, this is a machine. I agree in the fact that, if we stop feeding the body, it's not going to run, right? We stop giving it energy, it's not going to run. Same as my tractor outside of my property that I till my ground with. It's not going to run. Having worked on thousands and thousands of athletes of all caliber at this point, I can fix my tractor a lot quicker than I can fix a human body.
And you mentioned with characteristic self-deprecation, Michael, that you're no philosopher. We have a philosopher in the room.
That's why.
And for the historian in the room, I'm tempted to go back to the 17th century French philosopher René Descartes, who arguably introduced the notion that the mind is one thing and the body is another.
Yes. Well, he introduced that, but also specifically the idea that the body is a machine, right? So Descartes, he's famous for so many things. I think therefore I am, as a philosopher, a mathematician, that X and Y coordinate system that you learn in algebra, that's the Cartesian coordinate system. But really his most important contribution is to the history of science. And what he was working with this science that they got from Aristotle that he felt just wasn't working. And the problem with it was he felt it didn't give satisfying explanations. This is the business that science is in. It's supposed to explain what's going on with your body, what's going on in the natural world, why does it work like this? And he thought that the way to give really satisfying explanations was mechanistic, right? Like bodies in motion, matter in motion, bumping up against one body, bumping up against another, and all that kind of stuff. And so he had this idea that the body itself was a machine. Like the heart is like a pump and the lungs are like bellows, and it literally operates like this great big machine. But of course he saw one of the immediate limitations of that, which is trying to understand the mind in those same terms. So you get the appeal of the idea, this powerful explanation, but also the limits, that explanation only works really well for certain things, and for others it doesn't work out. So I was interested to hear you talk about where you thought that the analogy is helpful in your practice, right, with fuel or whatever, but then I'm also interested to know the places where you feel like it falls apart.
I'd say it immediately falls apart, right? Just really immediately. So if you think about, let's take a good example. If I say, listen, your elbow joint is a hinge joint, right? It is no different, right? It goes in and out, and it is in fact no different than the hinge on your door, right? So I, as a person, get an x-ray from somebody at work and they say, look, here's the fracture right here and we're treating that. And then you have this musculoskeletal problem right here that you can deal with, and we will just automatically fix this system and it will be just as good as the door hinge on the door, right? Well, this really breaks down because our model just doesn't work. So one of the places that our model doesn't work that I deal with all the time is in massage therapists, we deal with a tissue called fascia. And fascia is a very interesting substance. It is just a connective tissue. It's what wraps your muscles, your bones. We could make a whole bunch of analogies here, but imagine each muscle fiber is going to be wrapped in saran wrap. And then we take 10 of those muscle fibers and we wrap those in saran wrap. And then we take another 10 and we wrap those in saran wrap. And eventually we get something that looks like a sausage. And just like a sausage, at each end of the sausage, we now get a thing called a tendon, which is where the saran wrap has come down. Okay, so that thing, in anatomical terms, we might say my bicep connects right here. And in anatomy, we have like let's use a quad. So my quadricep muscle, my thigh muscle, connects to my tibial tuberosity. It inserts. We have this great word, inserts. Okay, how? Like a screw? Like what does it do? Like you're telling me that this soft tissue just became bone all of a sudden. Well, no, it kind of invested into the periosteum, which is the covering of the bone below it. And then it has a mechanical tension to it. So, all right, so now we're back to a scenario where, okay, this is a hinge joint. It's very mechanistic, but 3 months later, the bone has healed. We think the tissue is what it should be, but a player or an athlete is saying, hey, I'm still in pain. And now randomly I have this other pain in my opposite flank on my other side. Why could that be? Okay, well, if we start looking at the way these tissues work, it gets very complex very quickly. And because our model doesn't represent the true abilities of how tissues, organs work, it just breaks down immediately, right? And my real concern is this. My real concern is because people do what I call abuse complexity. So we might have to go into complexity. We'll come back. When people love there to be a solutional thing, right? They love it to be like arugula makes my testosterone go up. It's like, yeah, and what else? You know, it's not going to go into a system and do just one silly thing. So this idea that I have of abusing complexity is where people just love to be able to say, this thing works like this, that is the end, makes me smart, aiming at a model of the body, not how the body actually functions. Why is player still hurt 6 months later, somewhere adjacent to the injury site when we put an MRI on it and everything's good?
You know, one way that this comes up in my life, my daughter is a dancer, and she recently got this knee injury. And so, of course, we want to treat her, and we're like, you know, we send her to rolfing. She is not enthusiastic about this at all. She's got a brace. There's physical therapy, all these things that she's supposed to do. But all of those are from her perspective, a big pain in the butt. She doesn't want to do them. She wants the surgery, right? Because there's a surgery where you can just cut the, she has, her patella is kind of out of track. And if you reattach the patella in a different place, it solves some maltracking. She wants that because that's like the fix, right? So she's thinking about her knee as being like a joint, like a hinge, right? And she's like, oh, the hinge is broken. We just replace it. We put a new one in. But what she's missing, right, is the ways that the body isn't like a machine. And in this case, I think one of the most important ones is the body heals. Right? Like machines don't fix themselves. Machines don't have the power to correct their own problems. They require us to come in and do interventions. But of course, the body does. And it's a complex system where some parts depend upon other parts and they all work together in a certain way. If you readjust this one, there's kind of self-correcting mechanisms within the body that you're tinkering with there, right? But if you're just thinking of it like my daughter does, as like, oh, it's a hinge that's broken, then she's going to miss all of that. And she's going to miss opportunities to maybe help her body do its own natural processes to correct its own imbalances.
I really appreciate that, Michael, and I think that it's important as an example that's contrary to our broader societal understanding of the body as a machine. And I want to introduce to you, Michael, a distinction that the complexity scientist David Krakauer has between statistical machines and classical machines. So Krakauer believes that the body is a machine, and he says so emphatically, and he defines a machine as a, quote, mechanism that performs adaptive work and that is metabolically fueled. And by that definition, I do adaptive work. If Mary shoves me, I'm going to resist the shove. That is adaptive work, and I am metabolically fueled because I have to eat. The distinction he introduces between a classical machine and a statistical machine gestures to the possibility that a statistical machine has a neural net, like our brain. Given your thousands and thousands of hours of working not only on tissue, but also on people's minds and souls, if I may say so, how do you respond to that distinction?
First of all, David's an amazing guy. And autobiographically, I have a very specific brain that needs to know the board and all the pieces and then work my way up. So I didn't really succeed in school in the traditional way because if you start me in the middle of a process, I'm very lost. So I love starting at the bottom of a process and working my way up. So 10 years ago, I was in my practice going, listen, I see things happening here. The body changes every moment of every day, yet we treat it like it's static, right? Why are we doing that? I just had all of these questions. And out of nowhere, I believe on Sam Harris's podcast, I heard David Krakauer. And David started talking about complex adaptive systems. And I'll be totally honest with you, I cried. I was like, oh my gosh, there's people doing what I've gotten to thinking about the body as. Because I was going, why am I arguing with the orthopedic surgeon at football about the body being a complex adaptive system, to use the language I then learned, when he wants it to be a reductionist mechanism system, right? Like, why am I doing this? So love David, love what they're doing at SFI. My critique of that from my point of view of what they have is pretty simple. And I'm going to use a recording analogy here. So when I hear David and those guys talk about complex adaptive systems, it's like the system is adaptive and the system is networked, and therefore the system produces greater than what we expect of the system, right? So they have different words for this, and I am no expert, but I hear them toss around terms like emergence, things like this, right? Like, why do I get an Andrew when I put a neural network in a body, right? Like, nobody can really tell. So my experience as a body worker in particular, and talking with people and spending time in my office with people and all of these things, is the analogy I'm going to put forth here is one as a musician that I love, which is how we record music. So we record music with your CD will say what the sample rate and the bit depth is, right? So imagine I've got a CD and I'm going across the time axis, and I can tell my recording software how many times a second I'm going to sample, right? Mm-hmm. So right now, this recording software is doing it for us. It's doing it 44,100 times a second, right? Is what it's doing linearly across time. Then in each of those snapshots, you have what's called bit depth, right? How many pieces of information are we capturing in that linear time scale? Well, you can go, last I checked, as deep as like 192K, right? So, I mean, the amount of information you're catching is just unbelievable. So where I don't agree with David is when you get a practitioner of somebody like me that's been doing something for 20 years, I would love a complex system scientist to explain to me my palpation skills, because they're second to none. Right. And we have great things at football where I'm confirming my palpation skills. We now have like a ultrasound connected to an iPad. So you just go look. So a player comes to me and says, hey, I think I pulled this thing last night. I do my treatment. I walk over to the doctor and I go, hey, listen, right here, 2 centimeters deep is what I'm feeling. Can you check it with the ultrasound? And like, I'm 100%. Right. So I'm not trying to brag, but I'm just saying, like, after 20 years, the skill that's in my hands is, I don't know, it's something else. So the way I perceive that is I perceive that across that sample rate, my sample rate is really high across time when I'm working on with somebody. Like, I'm sampling more than you would because you don't put your hands on people every day. And then the bit depth of it over years has just gotten better and better and better and better. It's like I used to think there was 2 layers of tissue, and now I think there's about 15 everywhere I put hands, right? So it's just like, okay, so that's a kind of emergence of itself, to use David's language, and he would, I'm sure, not agree with that language, but I don't know the language exactly. So the only places I can turn to see that people saying that is I hear people in the East talk about things like chi flow, right? And I start wondering can the output of that much data by the human organism, which, by the way, if the human organism is in fact the highest fidelity thing that we can work with, like if my hands are way more high fidelity than an X-ray, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, and I'm sure some X-ray guy would tell me something different, but the point being, I've got this really high fidelity machine and I can't get a mathematical output, which is what everybody wants, right? Everybody wants to say like, oh, I got this math output, right? Palpation is this. And they want me to be able to say, here's the formula. And I think the only output you get when you look at the Tai Chi masters and things like that is they will say things like, the energy doesn't flow. Huh. And I think it's kind of like a summing function, right? One of my martial arts teachers used to say, there's 4 outputs of summing of that sample rate and bit depth: seeing, hearing, feeling, and knowing. He said, if you're fighting, no fighter goes hand coming at face at 32 miles an hour. He's already gone, right? And when you see the best in the world and you say, I've actually had this experience. We had a player years ago where I said, he was able to do things as a judo practitioner. I watched him do judo to people on the field. And he was tossing 400-pound dudes 10 yards across a field.
Wow.
And I just remember being like, and I looked at him one day and I was like, man, how'd you do that move? And he looks at me and goes, what? And I was like, well, do you remember the center and like play 2, you like toss the dude like 10 yards? He goes, he pissed me off. So I threw him. And I was like, got it. Your summing function is, I just know how to do this.
And a car cannot accelerate faster if it is angry at some other car for cutting it off.
Right.
And so back to Michael's example of, Matt's example of your daughter and the healing function, I'm perplexed as to the persistence of this notion of the body as a machine, all the way back to Descartes, in the face of so much evidence to the contrary. My supposition as to why it has so much cultural staying power, this notion of the mechanized body, is because it allows us to assume a position of ownership over it. And this is something Mary's smiling because she had put this in our pre-show notes. And there's a whole potential critique here of consumer capitalism, but I wonder if you have any thoughts about this theme.
It seems to me like there's actually 2 different things going on here. One is the question about predictability, right? Does a body function in the same way that a machine does, where you can kind of assess it by a certain set of laws or rules? This thing isn't working, therefore you do this thing. And there's something that's helpful about that, then we can treat diseases, right? But the ownership thing, that's another level. That's actually, there's even like a potential distinction to be made here, that part of the appeal, I think, of the body as machine metaphor is not just about the benefit of having predictability in a machine, but also the way that ownership has evolved alongside the emergence of complicated machines during the Industrial Revolution and since. I think there's a way in which we treat the body as a machine as something that we can do whatever we want with. So I teach a class called Ethics in the Body, and the first couple of words on the syllabus are a quote from the author and activist and thinker Sonia Renee Taylor, where she says, and apropos of you mentioning stuff about cars, she says too many of us treat our bodies like cars, that we fuel them, and often as cheaply as possible. And this is said by someone who walked into this recording studio with some Chick-fil-A. So, and then we take ourselves to get checked up when we need to. Often, like if something's wrong, right? Take our car body into the mechanic. But for the most part, like we really do treat our bodies like cars. There's a distinction that we're missing though there, that like if we wake up and our car bodies don't start, like that's it. Like that's not the case when it comes to our bodies. We can't use them and toss them away and get a new car, right? And so she's really concerned about this ownership side of the body as machine metaphor, because we fail to recognize not just how complicated and how difficult it would be to get the kind of assessment of the body as we might be able to get of a Hyundai, but also because that means that our relationship to our bodies is emaciated. It's bad. We're not taking our bodies as seriously as we ought to. And I'm thinking of the classic feminist book, like Our Bodies, Ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. That was really important. Mm-hmm. Our bodies really are such a huge part of ourselves. And so we need to be rethinking this kind of ownership and dispensability of the things that make it possible for us to get around the world.
To me, it's a very modern notion. And Matt, as a philosophy professor, I'm looking at you and thinking about Epictetus's ancient field manual of Stoic ethics as Enchiridion. And at the very beginning of it, he places the body in a set of 4 things that we, depending on the translation, have no control over or do not really pertain to us. And that is such contradistinction to our modern notions, whether it's our bodies ourselves or the body as a machine athletically.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask a philosopher what ownership means, so I'm thinking about like David Hume's account of ownership, oftentimes the explanation has to do with control. To own a thing means to have control over it. So And it seems to me like a common theme running through a lot of this is how much people want to have control over their bodies. This is what my daughter wants, why she wants the surgery. We want them to be like machines because we have control over machines. We understand how they work and we can fix their parts. You can take it to an expert who could just fix it and make it better. And I think it's that desire for control that is a lot of the appeal of the metaphor.
And Michael, having been your client in addition to your friend, I have very clear memories of you saying to me, you need to rest this. And that is not treating me like a machine. I'll give a very recent example. The other night, my wife and I threw a birthday party. My wife had a major milestone birthday, and it was a delightful time. It went fairly late into the night. We cooked all day. We were up late cleaning up. And even though I got 7 or 8 hours of sleep after the party, I was a wreck the next day. I hadn't drunk anything. There was no substance abuse. It was the expenditure of social energy, being on my feet in the kitchen for a long time. And according to the laws of mechanics, classical or statistical, I should have been fine at 8 o'clock the next morning. Mm-hmm. So why wasn't I?
You've got the $10 million question, man. I mean, you just didn't have enough coffee the next morning, I guess, is where we're at, right? I can't really answer these questions. And this goes back to, if we are trying to make the body a number system, one of the complaints I hear all the time from top tier athletes is when they put on their Whoop band or their Oura ring or their whatever tracker they have, they say, it told me not to train this morning and I felt fine. Right. And so there's some discrepancy here. Is the person, I don't think we own the body, but is the person right or is the Whoop band right? And I think that kind of thing gets really hard. And I mean, we look at this, not we, but my employers at football look at this. I mean, the players wear a thing half the size of a Snickers called a catapult. They know every step they took, how many miles they ran, what their heart rate was. They know every piece of data for these guys for every workout. And the data set that these companies must have now, if you're doing the whole SEC, 90 players per team, the data set you must have about everything is just huge. Well, I would really love to see modeled the predictive value of when a player doesn't feel good in the morning. Right? Because that's the thing that we're after, right? We're after a model that's actually predictive in some way, right? That's like, because that's the value of any model, to my understanding, right? You're going to say, does this model predict anything useful? And there are parts of the body, which David talks about later in the podcast that you referenced, where he says, listen, for genomics, when we say we have these 4 parts of DNA and we can just do the statistical math and figure out what happens. Yeah, there are parts reductionistly that work in a reduction way that work like that. But yeah, good luck telling me when somebody's going to be tired and when they're not going to be tired the next day. Like, you can only get that again in this kind of sense. I think I might have even texted you next morning and said, get some rest. And it was like my sixth sense being like, yeah, all of this output, I know Andrew. I know how his mind works. I know how his body works. And the output's going to be enough that he's going to be like, maybe he has to go for a long walk. It's like, yeah, we're on.
I hear the pushback against, don't treat your body like a car and don't expect it to behave like a machine. But I'm wanting to get a better idea about what the alternative is. Mm-hmm. So let's say I'm not going to treat my body like a car. What do I treat it like instead?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is
there a metaphor that I can use?
Is there a metaphor that you
like
can use?
Like a stand-in metaphor.
I mean, this is my brain loves thinking about this. I both love and fear distillation and reductionism in a huge way. So, my clients ask me all the time, what prescriptive thing do I need? And it's like, you should probably deliberately move somewhere between 150 minutes and 300 minutes a week. It should probably be split between something that makes you stronger or maintains your strength, something that affects your heart in a way of making it stronger, and something that does stability / mobility, right? So in a perfect world, if you were asking me, that would be what I would say. So unfortunately, the group of people that I work with, from SEC football players up to world champions of this and world champions of that, you have the exact opposite problem, right? And the exact opposite problem is if you tell them that, you're actually putting the brakes on them, right? And you're putting the brakes on them in a big freaking way.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, one of my clients right now is 4'11", 155 pounds. She is the world's strongest woman in her weight class, and she deadlifted. Now remember, she is 155 pounds. She deadlifted 850 pounds.
That's not true.
That's nuts.
I'll show you the video.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. And
She's nice as can be, by the way.
and she's incredibly nice. She's lovely. She's great. But if I said to her, hey, 300 minutes a week worth of lifting, a whole bunch of things would happen to her mind. Number one, had she been born in a different time and had access to a psychiatrist, there's probably some big probability that she would be what we'd call on the spectrum nowadays. And I'm not trying to diagnose anybody. I don't know anything about this. What I do know is that anybody that wants to be crushed by huge weights as their lifestyle.
Yeah.
And what they say to me is, I can't deal with myself unless this happens to me. I suffer from depression unless I am putting 450 pounds on my back and squatting it down over and over again. And then says things like, I don't really know how to function in normal society. A gym is the only place I feel comfortable because everybody's like me. There's a lot that goes into that. And you just go, okay, I get it. You know?
So I have a metaphor, back to your question, Matt. Human being. And Michael, what's both provocative and unsettling about your answer is that you're thinking along one vertex, maybe deliberately, and that vertex has to do with movement.
Right.
There are other vertices. And like I think of I kept thinking about children as you were talking, and we have 3 parents in the room. If a child gets enough calories and has had enough time running around the yard and has had the sufficient number of hours of sleep the night before, might that put them in a good mood? Yes. But what about playtime? What about drawing? What about cuddles with the parents? What about all these other intangible things that are harder to quantify that are along different vertices?
I mean, okay. So I'm not sure if I'm up for treating our bodies like a human being, because I think that, my research is on pregnancy, and I remember being pregnant, and I think about 7 months pregnant at the time, and thinking, you know what, honestly, Descartes was right. Like, I want to do all these things, and I can't because of this stupid body that I'm carrying around, and it's awful, and it's, it's important to recognize the ways that our bodies do kind of limit us, such that it's hard to say that along the lines of that, feminist textbook, that our bodies are ourselves. I think that there is something else going on, but I don't know. I was thinking, to answer Matt's question, like maybe we have to treat our bodies like a gift or like, a treasure, something that we should be grateful for, but that we don't get complete control over. One thing that I think about a lot in terms of this control over the body is that I also write a lot on infertility, and it's incredible the kinds of difficulty that people have facing the profound lack of control that they have over their bodies, right? When they want to have a child and can't. I mean, it is debilitating, and I think it's historically was debilitating for many women. So I think to just recognize how integral it is in our lives, how there are ways that it's fundamentally not in our control, even as there are things that may be under our control, like our breathing rate. You can do some box breathing if you need to, or the amount of sleep that we get at night. We have many of us have significantly more control over our sleep than we exercise. But yeah, the religious part of me was thinking, well, you can always treat your body like a temple, as some of us are instructed. But I think the gift thing is maybe more appropriate, right? Like it's something that we get that we ought to treasure. Because the other thing is we only get one thus far in life. Yeah, and I think that's also, this is bringing the religious ethics stuff in too, but there are reasons that a lot of religious traditions have like, you have to rest, have basically Michael's message to you, right? On the regular, you know.
I'm going to interrupt on one of my hobby horses here. One of the faults I always look for, which is I think is really obvious in the body, coming from playing music and from working with the body, one of the faults I think people see really quickly is what I call aiming at the model. So when I was a musician, young, there was so much pride taken in knowing music theory.
Sure.
And it's just not music, right? And so I think with the body, I think part of the problem is that we're kind of doing it in this room, and I'm guilty of it, even saying these things to you guys, is that we're all doing this. We're kind of saying the body is this, the mind is that, and we get this. And I think what happens in a lot of people is, because of that process, people then think that they can aim at something and this is the way a thing functions.
Yeah,
right? And that's it's worrisome to me in almost every way. And so the way I solved this for myself with my mind was I started doing Buddhist meditation. It was just like, stop the aiming at yourself. Like, I have depression, I will treat it, right? And then, like, secondarily, when I do my movement practice, it's very simple. I get on my yoga mat to start everything, and I do 10 sun salutation Bs and some things in there, and I go, what's in the system today?
Yeah.
Like what's appearing here in the system? I have enough background knowledge that I should just be able to say, you know what? I learned all the stuff. Now, what do I feel? Okay, I feel this. I'm going to do this today. I squatted with a barbell on my back. Wasn't a thing. I'm going to move on. And I really get concerned because I do this to myself. I had an experience the other night. I had an electrical sensation go from my left knee to my right rib. And so my anatomy brain, I mean, I've been to nerve dissection classes where we literally take the nerves out, runs down the file of like nerve, acupuncture meridian, this fascial thing. How did that connection happen? And and as I'm running down the file, I go, I just don't see the connection. And there was some just discounting immediately of like, well, I guess it didn't happen in reality. Then, like, I just watched my mind do this very funny thing. It was like, well, maybe it didn't happen. Like, I'm exaggerating, right?
Yeah.
I'm really exaggerating here. But that thing is the thing that I worry, educating people that their body is a machine will do to people.
Sure.
Is that it will disembody them from the actual thing we're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think it's worth interjecting here because I think this is something that many of us worry about, is the ways that functions actually in this place at a university in particular, right? We think, okay, if I have to write a paper, just sit down and don't move until you finish your paper or whatever. Whereas actually we don't put enough trust in the expertises that our bodies might have. We don't encourage people to walk around in the back of a classroom, right? We don't encourage people to bring their entire bodies into the space. Yeah, so I mean, this is one of the reasons actually I enjoy doing this podcast. My hope is that people might be listening to it as they're going for a walk, right? And engaging their bodies in more meaningful ways than we tend to in the academy. I don't know.
In a spirit of summation, I want to say that one of the top takeaways for me from this podcast is we could all use a dose of humility. And perhaps one of the central problems with treating the body as a machine in the culturally dominant way that we do is it assumes expertise and total knowledge of how it works. And Michael, for all of your life experience as a musician, as a body worker, as a jiu-jitsu practitioner, my main takeaway from what you're saying is that we could all use a dose of humility. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys.
Possessed is made possible by a generous grant from the University of South Carolina Humanities Collaborative.